I wasn't supposed to know about the Seabreeze Tower event, much less see the photos. It was one of those private evening things Ava's company did from time to time, too niche or specialized for spouses, as she liked to put it. I'd been trained to accept that word specialized without question. It was the conversational full stop she used when she didn't want follow-up questions. I only found out because a mutual friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in months, posted a short video to their story. No captions, no hashtags, just a string of **TS stitched together. I don't think they meant to make it public, the kind of accidental overshare you realize too late and scramble to delete. But by then, I'd already saved it. The first frame froze me. Ava, in a dimly lit dining hall with glass walls showing the ocean at night, wearing a navy hoodie I'd never seen before. Not mine. Not hers. I know her wardrobe almost by heart, down to the coats she keeps just in case in the hall closet. This hoodie looked too big for her, sleeves bunched up past her hands. Then there was him, Derek, his hand on her waist, low and confident. The kind of contact that leaves no doubt to anyone watching what kind of claim it's meant to signal. It wasn't some split-second touch for a photo. His fingers curved in, holding her like he'd been doing it for months. The next photo was worse. They were leaning close, laughing, with her hand resting lightly against his chest. In the background, the table in front of them was set for 2 plates, candles, and 2 drinks. One of them was a short glass with a wedge of lime, untouched. The other was a wine glass with deep red lipstick smeared on the rim. Her shade. I'd seen her put it on earlier that week before a late client dinner. Then I saw the detail that lodged itself in my mind like a thorn. 2 hotel room keys sticking out from her clutch. Not the credit card thin kind that slide into a wallet, but the old-fashioned plastic ones printed with the hotel logo. 1 would have been explainable. 2, the final image in that series was of the table itself, taken after they'd left. Both glasses now half-drained, plates barely touched. The kind of dinner you order for the appearance of dining while you focus on something else entirely. I told myself I needed context. That was the voice of the part of me still loyal to the marriage, still unwilling to admit what I was seeing. But the next thing I watched erased any room for context. A short clip surfaced later in the family group chat. It wasn't meant for me, it was meant for Brooke's husband, apparently, but someone forgot to mute the audience list. I tapped play, expecting something harmless, maybe a toast for some charity milestone. Instead, there they were, Ava, Brooke, and a half-circle of her colleagues, with Derek right beside her. They were raising their glasses, smiling too widely. Someone behind the camera shouted, "Here's to his downfall." Laughter followed. The kind of laughter that's sharper than it is joyful. Ava clinked her glass against Derek's, her smile tightening just as she sipped. I sat there on the couch staring at the paused frame, glass frozen halfway to her lips, wondering if that was the moment she realized I might see this someday. When I finally confronted her, hours later, after pacing the kitchen until I wore a groove into the tile, Ava didn't hesitate. She didn't fumble or look guilty. She rotated into it like an actress hitting her mark, voice calm, expression steady. "Oh, those pictures? That was nothing," she said, as if I'd brought up some distant vacation photo I'd misremembered. She explained, in a tone so patient it bordered on condescending, that the night had been strictly work-related. Derek was just helping her navigate the room. The hoodie? Borrowed because the conference space was freezing. The keys? A colleague lost hers, and Ava was just holding on to them until she got back. Even the lipstick on the wine glass had an alibi. I wasn't even drinking from that one. It was set there by mistake. Somewhere in there, we drifted into a side tangent about the organizational chaos of the event. She mentioned the caterers being late, the audiovisual setup glitching during Brooke's speech, the exhaustion of the guests who'd flown in that morning. Before I realized it, I was half listening to a breakdown of why their workshop meets gala format was so taxing on attendees. I had to snap myself back to the point. "Why was his hand on your waist?" I asked. She tilted her head. "Oh, you know how photographers try to get people to stand closer together. It's a thing." "It's not a thing when it's like that," I said. But she'd already moved on. pivoting into a comment about how Derek was helping carry materials for her presentation earlier in the day. It was a masterclass in redirection. Address just enough of the accusation to sound responsive, then flood the space with unrelated details until the original question feels smaller, pettier. And for a moment, I almost let her pull me into it. Almost. But the image of those two keys in her clutch kept flashing in my mind, each time louder than the last. Rewinding the strange patterns didn't require a therapist, just honesty and a calendar. Once the Seabreeze photos burned a hole through my denial, I opened my phone and scrolled backward month by month, letting each small oddity line up like mile markers on a road I'd been too proud to see. First came the location sharing. We turned it on years ago when I flew a lot for work. Practical peace of mind. Sometime this winter, hers began showing location unavailable after 6 p.m. Always with the same shrug. Battery saver, iOS glitch, creepy ad tracking. At first I believed it because believing is easier than prying. But the pattern was clockwork. Visible all day, ghosted at night, back online around midnight with a cheerful text about catching up on emails or a late sync with the team. Then the Pilates retreats started. Thursdays to Sundays, rotating through cities where neither her company nor any partner office existed. Santa Fe, Asheville, Boise. She sent me grainy photos of mats rolled out in conference rooms, women in matching leggings, green juice in plastic cups. The EXIF data, yes, I checked, was stripped every time. When I teased her about joining one, she laughed and said, "It's really for the hardcore girls. You hate the reformer." True. But I don't hate the truth. Saturday taxi receipts told their own story. Different drivers, same drop-off. A boutique hotel tucked behind a florist. The kind of place with hand-lettered chalkboard menus and an in-asterisk-mate elevator that fits two if they like each other. She said the rides were to meet Brooke for strategy dinners. Code for the kind of sisterly debriefs that supposedly kept Northline running. The rides always clustered after weeks when she'd been distant, like she needed a layover between versions of herself. A new perfume showed up on her skin, a bright, restless citrus with a woodsy finish, not one of the 3 bottles on her dresser. I asked about it in the car and watched the half-second delay before she answered. A sample, a gift bag, a recommendation from a coworker's wife. It clung to her when she got home late, the aerated smell of a lobby where everything's sprayed to feel clean and expensive. The early showers began around the same time. She'd claim a 6 a.m. yoga class and jump in before the alarm, steam swallowing the mirror. Her hair braided wet and fast like a getaway. I used to love the sound of that shower. It meant our day had beg asterisk-n. Lately it sounded like the ocean pulling out before a riptide. Texts started disappearing. Not just the risky ones. Threads with ordinary people blinked out mid-conversation, the kind of maintenance chat you keep unless you've decided your phone is an Etch-a-Sketch. On my side, the bubbles remained. On hers, a curated museum of nothing. She said she was decluttering. I said nothing, which, it turns out, is a form of permission. Shared plans lost their stickiness. I'd put a birthday dinner on the calendar. She'd clear it for an urgent client call. Weekend hikes were bumped for board prep. Even when we made it to a restaurant, the buzzy vibration from her clutch would pull her eyes away, and the rest of her would follow. I learned to finish meals without an audience. I kept telling myself these were quirks of a growth phase, the ugly scaffolding behind achievement. But then the Brooke factor sharpened into focus. Ava's older sister had founded Northline Dynamics on a cocktail of charisma and crisp white decks. People followed her because saying no seemed like bad career hygiene. When Brooke pulled Ava into the circle, it wasn't a request. Suddenly there were joint trips billed to the company and strategic sessions reimbursed as client expenses. There were gifts routed through vendors, handwritten thank you notes posted to Slack like proof of virtue. And the photos. Always the photos. Staff snapsh *TS from crisis quarters told the story no memo would. Brooke hosting private dinners while telling the rank and file to tighten belts. Spa weekends framed as leadership resets, appearing the same month bonuses were prudently deferred. In one picture, Brooke lifted a flute, the caption breathless about resilience. In the background, I spotted Derek's profile at her shoulder, the familiar hooked smile of someone who thinks he's found the cheat codes. When I replayed the year, small scenes rose up with new edges. A Thursday night when Ava switched to airplane mode at the exact moment my lift canceled and I needed a ride home. A Sunday morning when she left for a breathwork circle and came back with sunburn in the shape of a deck chair. The morning I found a key card in our dryer, warped by heat, printed with a wave pattern that matched the boutique hotel's lobby mural. She laughed and said Brooke must have borrowed our laundry once. We do not share a laundry room with Brooke. Even our dog seemed to note the drift, circling Ava's suitcase with the cautious sniff he usually saved for fireworks nights. She started packing lighter, always with a small black pouch for vitamins. The kind of pouch you can slide a ring into if you need to keep it quiet. I don't know why that detail mattered to me, except that marriages are built on small objects that don't move unless hands move them. A few times I tried plain speech. I feel like you're somewhere else, I said one night as she folded a blazer into thirds like a hotelier. She smiled with everything except her eyes. Babe, I'm just tired. We're pushing so hard. She used we the way a storm uses cloud cover. Brooke's name became a spell. Any concern I raised dissolved under it. Brooke needs me. Brooke's under pressure. Brooke's cleaning up messes you wouldn't believe. I'd met messes. I even admired people who cleaned them. What I didn't admire was how Northline's language turned every indulgence into an imperative. A new resort wasn't a splurge. It was a venue with white glove bandwidth. A catered massage circuit wasn't self-care. It was nervous system optimization. The more ornate the phrasing, the more expensive the receipt. I remember the first time I saw Derek's name on her screen. He'd sent a calendar invite titled, Prep, Quiet Room. I asked what it meant. She said he booked small spaces for focus like a considerate teammate. Later, when I walked by her office, I could hear a man's laugh through her headphones. She said it was a podcast. I asked which one. She said, oh, it autoplayed. The Saturdays were the worst. The same rides, the same address, the same 2-hour window where her phone dropped off and her explanations repeated. Spa steam ruined signals. She left the charger at work. She promised she'd make it up to me with brunch. Once, I went to the boutique hotel myself and told the front desk I'd left my wallet in a room. The clerk smiled, professional and opaque, and asked for the room number. I gave a random one. He checked, shook his head, and handed me a bottle of water with the hotel crest. It felt like communion for the abandoned. I wanted a benign explanation to string through all of it, a thread to pull the sweater back into shape. But threads don't repair sweaters. They undo them. What I had wasn't proof, not yet. What I had was a story whose characters kept repeating their lines. The vanished pins on the map, the int asterisk made elevator, the citruswood perfume, the early showers, the disappearing texts, the urgent tasks that always landed on top of my plans, and Brooke's generous definition of company business. If I'm honest, the thing that shifted me from suspicion to vigilance wasn't any one clue. It was the way she stopped asking me questions. We used to narrate our days to each other like radio hosts. Lately I learned about her life the way you learn about weather in another state, through jagged reports, echoed phrases, and photos that showed clouds but not the wind. So I did what people do when the ground moves. I planted markers. I exported bank alerts, turned on email forwarding for travel confirmations, and made a quiet folder where I stored anything that felt off. Not to trap her, I told myself. To steady me. To prove I wasn't crazy if the day came when she told me I was. And I started paying careful attention to Brooke's public sermons. Cost control is culture, she told a town hall. The week after, a vendor posted a boomerang of her leading a private tasting at a coastal villa. We protect our people, she wrote in a burnout essay. The next slide in a leaked deck announced mandatory optional wellness weekends hosted offsite. On paper, Northline looked disciplined. In photos, it looked like a club. In the space between those two truths, I began to see the outline of my marriage. Staged, well-lit increasingly for show. When I finally let my intuition finish its sentence, the rest of the year rearranged itself with brutal clarity. I hadn't been overreacting. I'd been under-listening. All those little things? They weren't static. They were signals. and signals, once you tune to them, don't stop talking until you answer back. Finding patterns was one thing. Finding proof was another. Patterns could be explained away, bent into shapes that sounded innocent if you were desperate enough to believe them. But proof was a brick through the window of denial. Once it landed, you couldn't unsee the glass on the floor. The first brick came in the form of a charge from a resort spa in Sedona. I wasn't looking for it, not exactly. I'd set up account alerts after the Seabreeze photos, a quiet alarm bell that would chime whenever anything over $100 posted. This one went off at 2 in the morning on a Wednesday, which is not the hour most people buy a double spa package. The itemized line read like a honeymoon brochure: 2 aromatherapy massages, 2 hydrotherapy treatments, a shared mindfulness experience. It was from the same quarter Brooke had frozen bonuses, the quarter Ava claimed she was living on budget granola bars at the office. I didn't even have to ask who the double was for. 2 days later, a restaurant in Sedona showed another charge: romantic set menu for 2. I called the place. The hostess, polite and tired, confirmed the date, the time, and that the couple had taken the sunset seating with the best view. When I asked the name on the reservation, she hesitated, then read it back. It wasn't Ava's name. It wasn't even Derek's. It was a hyphenated surname I didn't recognize, a fiction, chosen carefully enough to avoid being searchable, but sloppy enough to leave a paper trail. That sent me down the rabbit hole of public hotel registries. A boutique place in New Orleans popped up in one of the travel aggregator feeds. The booking was under the same fictional married name, with Derek's ID used for check-in and Ava's phone number on file for special contact. The room was a king suite with balcony access. I knew the balcony because I'd seen it before, in one of her solo work trip selfies, cropped just tightly enough to exclude the view of the second chair. Parking lot camera footage sealed the timeline. A friend in facilities owed me a favor, the kind that comes with caveats about not asking too many questions. The grainy black and white showed them walking in side by side, luggage in hand, casual as vacationers. No touch that would scream caught, but an easy nearness, like the choreography of people who'd rehearsed it. 14 hours later, the same camera caught them leaving, both in different clothes, her hair tied up in a way she never wore it around me. I told myself I needed one more layer before calling it undeniable. That layer came from airline mileage logs. Ava had said she was flying to a client onboarding in Chicago the same week Derek was supposedly at a leadership retreat in Denver. The records, however, told a different story: 2 separate bookings on the same airline, routed through the same connection city, departing within 20 minutes of each other and arriving at the same coastal hub. The return flights were synchronized too, down to the gate. She'd even earned bonus miles for traveling with companion. That was the trip she came back from with a company welcome kit for a client I later learned had never existed. The final piece was almost theatrical. Internal Northline expense accounts, which I accessed via a set of login credentials someone clearly hadn't bothered to deactivate, showed a charge coded as Key Client Center Coastal. The actual merchant? A villa rental agency whose properties show up in glossy travel magazines under phrases like exclusive and footsteps to the shore. Receipts confirmed they'd stayed for 5 nights. The ledger listed it as a business lodging expense for a client experience initiative. The reality was a beach house with white shutters, a private chef, and a deck where, according to a public geotag, they'd watched the sunset and posted a picture of the wine glasses. Her account showed just the horizon. His showed the same sh*t from a slightly wider angle. That was it. No more debating whether I was overthinking. No more mentally drafting maybe scenarios where she'd been framed by coincidence. This wasn't patterns. This was evidence, laid out like exhibits in a trial where I was both prosecutor and victim. When you have that kind of proof, your mind does a strange thing. You expect rage to detonate, but what arrives first is stillness. The kind of stillness you get in the eye of a storm, knowing the other side is coming. My breathing slowed. My hands, which had been shaking for weeks, went steady. There's a difference between suspecting your world is being dismantled and watching the blueprints in someone else's handwriting. I didn't rush to confront her. that would have given her the oxygen to spin it, to turn each fact into an anecdote with a harmless angle. Instead, I started making copies, bank screensh *TS, restaurant receipts, booking confirmations, camera stills, flight itineraries, expense reports. I backed them up in 3 places, one of them off-grid entirely. The more I assembled, the clearer the scope became. It wasn't just betrayal, it was logistics. Campaign. Coordinated deception threaded through corporate privilege. Signed off in triplicate by people who either didn't care or didn't think I'd ever be in the room to ask. When I finally closed the folder that night, the proof sat there like a living thing. Heavy, undeniable, and patient. I realized then that I wasn't just looking at the collapse of a marriage. I was holding the trigger for whatever came next. And for the first time, I wanted her to see it. Not to explain it away, but to watch her face when she realized I'd taken away the one thing she'd relied on the whole time. My ignorance. Proof changes posture. Before, I was just a man gathering fragments in the dark, trying to piece together what I was too cautious to admit. After the folder was full, my spine straightened. I didn't walk into the next day as her husband anymore. I walked in as an adversary. The first thing I did was sit at my desk and pull up a directory I hadn't touched in years. Back before Ava's world was all Northline-branded lanyards and leadership intensives. I'd built and sold 2 modest companies. Not glamorous, but enough to have left me with dormant assets. Shelf corporations registered in states where they don't ask too many questions. Trusts set up for long-term diversification that had never been used for more than holding a little real estate. 3 names blinked back at me as if they'd been waiting. Cobalt Ridge Holdings in Wyoming, Mason Harbor Partners in Delaware, and a trust with a postal address somewhere that requires 4 flights to reach. They'd been sleeping quietly in annual report purgatory, but their bones were intact, EIN numbers still valid, bank relationships still friendly, the kind of entities you can activate with a few notarized documents and the right invoice. I started with the balance sheets for Northline. I already knew they weren't public. The company wasn't big enough to have SEC filings. But there are ways to find the outlines. Vendor lawsuits, tax lien records, Regional Credit Bureau snapsh *TS. Northline had grown fast, too fast. Brooks' empire ran on momentum and optics, which meant debt. That debt had been packaged into short-term promissory notes and convertible bonds during an aggressive hiring phase 2 years ago. It wasn't uncommon. What was uncommon was how many of those notes were now held by shell companies with no discernible branding. I knew where to shop for paper like that. 2 phone calls and a discreet escrow later. Cobalt Ridge Holdings owned enough of those overdue notes to demand repayment at terms Northline couldn't meet. Mason Harbor Partners picked up a smaller but more pointed piece. A convertible bond that, if exercised, would dilute Brooks' personal shares. The offshore trust? That was for something else entirely. To tighten the map, I called Maya. She used to run operations for Northline before she left abruptly, the kind of departure no one speaks about in polite company. I'd heard the whispers. Creative differences? Wasn't a culture fit, which usually means someone refused to sign off on a magic trick. When she picked up, there was a beat of silence before she said, "I thought I'd never hear from you." "You were right to leave," I told her. "I just didn't know it at the time. I need a picture of their soft spots." Maya laughed, low and without humor. "You're looking for bones to break?" "I'm looking for levers," I corrected. Over the next week, she built me a dossier. It wasn't sensational, no hidden crimes or explosive fraud, but it was exactly what I needed. A map of structural weakness. Northline relied on 2 payment processors for over 80% of its receivables. Both had long-standing frustrations with custom invoicing Brooke insisted on, which slowed down settlement. Half of the high-profile wellness retreats were expensed under leadership development, but produced no measurable outcomes. The write-ups were copy-pasted between events. The preferred vendor list included shell contractors that did little beyond forwarding invoices from the actual suppliers, a neat way to overstate margins. All of it legal if you squint hard enough. All of it catastrophic if the right clients started looking elsewhere. That's where Halcyon 14 came in. On paper, it was a clean front consultancy, incorporated by Mason Harbor, banked through the offshore trust, branded with the kind of neutral elegance that makes procurement officers feel safe. In reality, it was a siphon. We offered the same deliverables Northline sold, but faster, with compliance guarantees that read like legal poetry, and pricing that shaved just enough margin to make switching a matter of fiscal responsibility. I didn't want them to panic yet. I wanted them to see the offer, run the numbers, and feel their CFO lean forward. Maya handled the approach. She knew the two anchor clients whose invoices kept Northline's cash flow steady. She sent them a white paper under Halcyon's letterhead, a breakdown of emerging compliance risks in boutique vendor ecosystems, complete with side-by-side comparisons of deployment timelines. No accusations, no names, just enough to make them question whether their current vendor could keep them out of a regulatory mess. I wasn't naive. This wasn't going to ruin them overnight, but it would plant a seed. And if the seed grew, the roots would wrap around the very revenue streams Brooke used to finance the optics she and Ava were so proud of. While Halcyon 14's offers circulated quietly, Cobalt Ridge began sending polite, formal notices to Northline's accounts department. Reminders of note maturity dates, requests for repayment schedules, all within the legal frame but with deadlines tight enough to require Brooke's attention. Mason Harbor sent an equally polite notice exercising its right to explore conversion on the bond it held, a move that would trigger an internal review of shareholding structures. I didn't tell Ava any of this. She was still playing the role of the distracted spouse, careful not to leave her phone unattended, over-explaining benign evenings, trying to salvage her credibility in small, performative ways. Let her keep playing. The less she suspected, the cleaner the endgame. Every night, I'd close my laptop knowing we'd moved another inch. Not enough to be felt in her day yet, but enough that somewhere in Northline's back office, a spreadsheet was starting to turn red. People talk about revenge like it's an explosion. Fast, loud, blinding. They forget it can also be erosion. Quiet, steady, inevitable. By the time Ava realized the tide was going out, I intended for the shoreline to already be gone. Destabilization isn't a thunderclap. It's a vibration under the floorboards, the kind you don't notice until a glass tips over. 2 weeks after Halcyon 14 began its discreet courtship, the first tremor hit. The two anchor clients, the same ones keeping Northline's heartbeat steady, didn't cancel their projects. They paused them for review. Corporate speak, polite as a handshake, but I knew what it meant. Pause is a door halfway closed. It rarely swings the other way. Inside Northline, the pause set off a chain reaction I'd counted on. Maya still had friends in operations, the kind who live in messaging apps more than email. *TS started finding their way to me. Early morning alignment calls became daily rituals, followed by value recitations like some corporate catechism. Brooke, who used to sweep into the office around 10:30 in sunglasses, was suddenly leading 7 a.m. Zoom meetings from her kitchen island, voice sharp, eyes scanning for cracks in the wall. They thought the leak was a person. Rumors about a mole took hold. Middle managers were pulled into one-on-ones to clarify loyalties. I saw a message thread where one team lead wrote, "If you're not with the program, there's the door." 3 days later, 2 engineers resigned without giving notice or exit interviews. They weren't the kind who make noise on the way out, but their absence left product deadlines wobbling. In the wellness tracker system Northline had implemented, their proud culture analytics tool, anonymous alerts spiked. Burnout risk and engagement decline *T into the red zone. The system generated a report for leadership, which I also received via one of Maya's channels. The top note: key contributors showing decreased resilience metrics. The attrition wasn't massive yet, but it was precise. The people leaving were the ones whose absence forces everyone else to pick up slack. A small enough bleed to avoid headlines, but deep enough to make the survivors wonder if they should be next. Meanwhile, *TS began surfacing in Slack backchannels. Images of internal memos bearing Brooke's signature. One in particular spread quietly like contraband. An approval for strategic wellness expenses, dated during the same quarter she'd ordered cost controls company-wide. The expenses? A 3-day reset at a coastal spa, attended by senior staff and billed under team cohesion. In the memo's footer, you could see the standard Northline policy code that covered ethical conduct. And in the very same policy, authored by Brooke herself years ago, was a line prohibiting romantic or familial relationships between executives and individuals with a financial or strategic stake in the company. They didn't know it yet, but that line was the keystone in the dossier I was building. Derek wasn't just Ava's co-conspirator. He was also positioned in a way that tied him directly into decision-making. And Ava, through Brooke's personal entanglements, counted as family under the stakeholder definition. Every piece of it was drawn from their own documents. No speculation, no rumor, their own language as the blade. It amused me, in a cold way, how they still thought they were toasting my absence from the game. I heard about one of those toasts from an unexpected source. A junior event coordinator who'd once worked with Ava on a fundraiser. She sent me a video from a charity reception. Brooke's circle raising glasses, Derek's laugh cutting through the clink of stemware, someone off camera saying, "Guess he finally gave up." They thought I was somewhere licking my wounds. What they didn't know was that while they were drinking champagne in one hall, in an adjacent conference room, Maya and I were finalizing the layout of the dossier. We weren't rushing. Every document had to be watertight. Invoices for the private villas, receipts for the dual spa treatments, photographs of Brooke's signature authorizing retreats during declared austerity, airline manifests showing Ava and Derek's matching itineraries dressed up as separate business trips. Expense line items coded under client hospitality for purchases that never saw a client. The conflict of interest section practically wrote itself. Internal memos tied Derek's approvals to initiatives benefiting Ava's projects, despite her lack of formal role in those accounts. Cross-reference that with the policy on relationships, and it wasn't just a moral breach, it was a governance failure. By the time the dossier was complete, it didn't read like an attack. It read like a compliance officer's nightmare. Facts, dates, internal language, and cross-references to their own stated values. No commentary, no opinion. Just the mirror held steady. The strategy was to make the delivery surgical. This wasn't going to be an email blast or a leak to the press. The audience was specific. Northline's board. Not the decorative board that posed for photos, but the voting body with the authority to move executives around like chess pieces. And they would get the dossier in a way that allowed no interception. Hand-delivered, sealed, logged. Enough to force a closed-door session. Enough to ensure Brooke's circle couldn't spin the narrative before the people holding the real levers had read every page. While they clinked glasses over my supposed inaction, I had the paperwork in a leather folder, sitting on my desk like a loaded instrument. I didn't even have to imagine the effect. I'd already seen the first signs. Clients gone cautious, staff in quiet rebellion, leadership looking over its shoulder. Destabilization at this stage wasn't about chaos for its own sake. It was about softening the ground so that when the blow came, it wouldn't just land, it would sink. And by the time it did, there'd be no mistaking who had been paying attention all along.